Everyone thinks they're such sweet little ducks, ducks. Soft downy feathers and nice little ducks, ducks. But there's a poison I'd like to administer. You think they're cuddly, but I think they're sinister. Ducks, ducks. Ducks, ducks. What are they doing at night in the park? Ducks, ducks. Think of them waddling about in the dark. Ducks, ducks. Sneering and whispering and stealing your cars, reading pornography, smoking cigars. Ducks, ducks.
Hey, welcome to the Danger Room. It's me, Dan. Today we're going to be talking about Alan Moore and a bunch of other stuff too. This is the my new live stream. I'm going to be live streaming a lot more. I've got a lot more control over my own schedule and my own destiny now. So I'm going to be live streaming more. What the hell? Why not? But part of what I want to do here is kind of change it up. I've been a little bit distant kind of in my interviews, and I don't interact as much as I want to with the audience. That's all changed now with Danger Room. What we want to do is hear from you. So if you're interested or want to have questions right in the middle of anything, just let me know. Okay. Today we're going to talk about Alan Moore and the brand new video that just dropped, The Secret History of Alan Moore, Illuminating Alan Moore. And it talks about something that I have touched on. Pretty close. I'm self-employed. Almost the same thing, right? I've been self-employed for years, and I've decided to stay self-employed is basically the big thing. Decided, right? Yeah, I've decided. Because why not? I got time to do this. So anyway, Alan Moore. Today, we'll talk about kind of the dark side. A little bit of a dark side of Alan Moore that's come to light in this new video by Mikey Karate. Okay, and it kind of backs up, unfortunately, the story that I've heard from a bunch of people that I've talked to on this show, right? So I've talked to Steve Bissett, I've talked to Don Simpson, I've talked to Rick Veitch, I've talked to several other more collaborators, including Eddie Campbell. I'm spacing on Eddie Campbell. He's probably my favorite. And ironically, Eddie Campbell's the guy who's probably maintained the best relationship with Alan Moore. So he doesn't even factor into this thing. Yeah. Don Simpson's blog about this was incredible, Larry. I agree. I recommend you guys check it out. And I've been talking with Don, and he had some thoughts on this. I'm hoping he's going to watch this and maybe drop in with some comments or something. One of the things I talked to Don about was I was like, well, and we'll watch this video a little bit. We're not going to watch the whole thing. We'll watch parts of it because I'm a little bit torn on this, because while it does bring to light some stuff that I never really knew and that was kind of hidden from folks a little bit in the lore and the reporting about Alan Moore, about his relationship with Alan Davis. This is the thing that bugs me the most about this documentary, in the sense that it's like, to me, it's the most egregious thing that I've heard of Moore doing. Now, I'll say that with a couple caveats. As I told Don, I'm like, Don, he didn't want his name on the new version of Pictopia. And okay, that probably undoubtedly cost you sales on that, but still, it's in print, it's out there, nobody can take that away. So I don't think you were as badly done to as Alan Davis was, I suppose, because Karate goes into this about how Moore really jerked him around about the reprinting of Captain Britain here in the States, which took a long time, their Captain Britain work, and kind of cost Alan Davis, I don't know, some money relationship. It's a little bit unclear, because the true nature of why they're mad at each other. And the difference between UK and US copyright laws and stuff make it sort of sticky. Like legally, Moore's got the right to say, I don't want my stuff to be reprinted as the like co-copyright holder of certain works. The problem with that is that he's rich and famous, and some of those co-creators are not as famous and definitely not as rich. And like the amount of money, for instance, that a Steve Bissett or a Rick Veitch, and a Don Simpson and several others would get from reprinting 1963 would be a large amount of money for those guys. Not as much. It probably is almost meaningless to Alan Moore, and that's almost what makes it such a big shame. Is because to him it's probably on the order of maybe a few $100,000, I would think, not millions of dollars. But like for Steve Bissett and for a Rick Veitch, who don't have the vast catalog of stuff and critical acclaim and movie money and stuff that Moore does, it really is sort of like taking away something that's like pretty crucial for these guys in their retirement age. When he doesn't need to. It seems spiteful. But why, right? Why spiteful? Why is there a reason for spite? And this is the problem I have with the Alan Moore or the Alan Davis situation. Before I get too deep into this, let's watch a little bit of this video. We got time today, guys. I'm going to be online for a while. So let's look at this thing for a second. Where do I find this thing? Yeah, here we go. All right, let's check out a little bit of Mike Crotty's Alan Moore Secret History.
Hello and welcome to Comic Secret History. My name is Mikey Crotty. The purpose of this channel is to present the...
And no, I don't have it in slow mode. Let's see, I got it in normal speed. At first, I thought I had it in...
Actual facts around famous or infamous events in recent-ish comics history, in an effort to balance the overwhelmingly false narratives that perpetuate comics journalism and media. So
I'm going to crank the speed up.
This particular piece unravels some of Alan Moore's invented history and definitively reveals, for pretty much the first time, why he stopped Marvel reprinting Captain Britain, why he resolved never to work with Marvel, except for when he did, and no, I'm not talking about the famine benefit comic, why he and his closest, most prolific co-creator Alan Davis fell out, the only actual time in Moore's history where a creator's work was stolen and swindled, and Moore's role in it. Exactly how deceptively complex his infamous Watchmen contract was, why his narrative about the Watchmen contract is a lie, why he actually attacks comics and their film adaptations, and you'll see it's actually only DC's that he attacks, his own history of respect for his precious creators' rights, which acclaimed Moore-owned series would never exist, except for Steve Bissett, why almost a dozen comic creators can't reprint their creator-owned work because it was written by Moore, which comic book creator went to their grave, prevented from seeing reprint fees from their work, thanks to Alan Moore. Which beloved comic writer did Alan Moore lie about after his death to prop up another of his lies? How did Alan Moore credit or acknowledge the original creators of characters he used in his creator-owned books or authors of novels he adapted? And which Moore co-creator spent the pandemic working factory night shift because Moore wouldn't allow his name to appear on their creator-owned work to bolster sales?
Okay, so that kind of over outlines a lot of the stuff that he's going to talk about. I'll be honest. Some of the stuff... like Alan Moore's knowledge of contract law, for instance. I don't think I have much but to take Alan Moore's word, at face value that he didn't read it and didn't understand the contracts. And that is far from unusual for artists or even writers, especially of that era, who were utterly uninterested in that stuff. Now, as his career evolved, and he started getting shafted based on these contracts that he said he didn't read and didn't have a lawyer look at. He should have, and probably started to. So let's keep this going.
I'd like to thank in particular the kindness and generosity of Alan Davis, Steve Bissett, David Lloyd, Don Simpson, and Des Skin for all their assistance in unraveling the truth.
Friends of this show too. Some
Alan
of those
Moore is
guys.
the most famous and respected comic writer in the world today. His work on titles such as Watchmen, V for Vendetta, From Hell, and many others have elevated the medium as well as generating a slew of cinematic adaptations. Despite the enduring success, influence, and critical acclaim the comics media afforded him, Moore has spent almost the last 2 decades condemning the medium, its publishers, employees, and even audience, and he gives a very good reason for this. He's repeatedly stated publicly that television and cinematic adaptations diminish the original work, and that he was, this is in quotes, folks, swindled and stolen of his creations and his creators' rights by crooked contracts from unscrupulous gangster corporations who never valued or respected the creators producing the work. And so,
now, okay. So first of all, if you've seen the adaptation, if you've read Alan Moore's comics as I have, and seen the adaptations as I have, you know they stink. The closest one that, to my eyes, that was like the highest quality, I think, of any Moore adaptation had to be V for Vendetta, and even that deviated dramatically from the themes of V for Vendetta, turning it into kind of a more of a standard kind of like anti-totalitarianism thing, and less about, you know, Moore's true political leanings, which is as an anarchist. And it was really about fascism versus anarchy, totalitarianism, fascism versus anarchy, and your ability to control yourself. So you can see where a guy with this nature, who feels like what were his greatest works got stripped away from him, right, by these corporations and their evil contracts. You can kind of see why he would feel this way, right? And what does he say about this? Yeah.
You see what those bloody corporations do? They take your ideas and they suck them like leeches until they've gotten every last drop of the marrow from your bones.
That's kind of what they do, right? I mean, it's true. We know people have had a great history with this. However, I will say this. Alan Moore got unprecedented contracts with DC. They kind of bent over backwards because they knew they had something special. But I really think it was their rejection of the Twilight of the Gods that probably just made him decide he was kind of done with them. Is more of an ego blow than anything. And ironically, that Twilight of the Gods pitch talked about the commercial exploitation of those comics, you know, as a main selling feature. Okay.
Surprisingly, a lot of people support his stance. But the truth is, it's utterly contrived to garner sympathy and support for a very personal, petty vendetta. It has no basis in fact, and is completely contrary, actually, to how Moore himself has always behaved and mistreated his fellow peers, creators, and colleagues. Moore's self-written history is a fictional reimagining of reality, emboldened by all the interviews, articles, and biographies that echo it across the world. Like most of his celebrated works, it involves intricately described imagined chronology and events, evocative and emotive language and metaphors and twists and turns, invisible at the start but delicately planted and nurtured, apparent at the end, rewarding subsequent rereads. In this particular Moore tale, the victim is revealed to be the villain. All his imagined abuses actually visited deliberately by him on others, stealing from closest collaborators, erasing other creators' contributions to his own work, and even damaging colleagues' careers and livelihoods as collateral. Even the co-creators of his most famous works, who never openly contradicted his lies, have been repeatedly defamed by him and their reputations damaged, simply because they haven't publicly supported his very personal vendettas. He even suggests comics are responsible for infantilizing the readers, as well as the election of Donald Trump. Before dismissing that as sarcasm or humor,
you know what? I'm going to agree with him on that one a little bit. I definitely feel like fascist or superheroes are a fascist narrative. At their heart, they have roots in fascism, and they really do present fascist ideas in a way that's extremely palatable to the American public and to the public at large. I'm going to talk about this a lot in a later video I've got coming up. Like the fact that, and even the people that write them might not even feel, they don't feel that way, and they publicly state not to, but they might not quite grasp what's going on in the narratives of, like, you know, your savior being super powered beings from on high above the law who kind of like have our best interests at stake. They're superior to us, and they have our best interests at heart. That's not my kind of thing. And so I can definitely understand why Moore bristles at them and describes them as an infantilized medium and talks about them leading to the election of Donald Trump, because I think there's something to it. That's really the magic that Moore talks about, is magic in magic is just a way to change somebody's mind. Really, magic is like ideas changing the world. Your ideas going out and changing the world is the essence of magic, in my opinion. I think Moore might say the same. Maybe not, but no matter what, Moore's ideas have gone out, and his, not just his stories, but his stories sort of about his own origins and why he won't work with Marvel. There's a lot of stuff in here about the Marvel trademark and Marvel Man, and should Marvel, did Marvel ever explicitly say, no, you can't use the name Marvel? Well, no, they didn't, because Deskin and the publishers, and even Moore himself, was smart enough to know that they were going to run into those copyright problems. Karate goes into
his supporters suggest. In other recent interviews, he's also hilariously suggested the Ku Klux Klan were the inspiration behind superheroes, and that the mafia created the comics industry.
Now that's another one. I almost ran with that. I almost ran with that and did a video about his Ku Klux Klan statements. And I went to noted comics historian and friend of the show to ask about that, Ken Quattro. He thought Moore was way off base. I think that you can definitely see the parallels of a masked, anonymous group of people claiming to do good and having, like, being supernaturally affiliated. Like, you can see the connection, and also understanding Moore's point was that the KKK film, A Birth of a Nation. I mean, dude, people don't understand. That was like one of the biggest hits of all time. It played for so long. And it really, like, almost like Superman, where some of the mythos and parts of the mythos came out of the Superman radio show, not the comics, things like the Daily Planet, and I think even Kryptonite. I might be wrong about that. The Ku Klux Klan, a lot of stuff came out, like the cross burnings and stuff. That was just very cinematic, but but it spread that mythos and turned the lie into the truth. Took the fictional ideas and the fictionalized ideas and turned them into truth. Okay, Tripflix 6 Gaming says, okay, wait a minute. Peerless Loser says, yeah, World Police. I remember growing up in the 80s, it was a constant debate, America's role in the world. Dude, it's still a constant debate. It's still foremost in my mind on a lot of things I'm watching, especially Star Trek. When I watch Star Trek, I talk with Larry. I see Larry in the chat. We'll be talking this week about Star Trek Brave New Worlds, and also maybe a little bit about Halo, also on Paramount, which I think is pretty cool because they really treated it almost like a flip side to Star Trek. If you haven't watched Halo, and I've just started, it's kind of Mandalorian-esque, definitely meets Starship Troopers, but with a surprisingly deep kind of backstory to it. And like, I love the Madrigalians that are really, like, if you've read Starship Troopers, not seen the movie, you've read Starship Troopers, it's like the Skinnies. There's this other race. There's another race of aliens in Starship Troopers called the Skinnies that are just sort of caught in the middle of the battle between the humans and the bugs. We'll keep going on this video in a minute. I want to get to some more of these comments here. Excuse my being late. Didn't Moore give the okay to make movies like Watchmen or Vendetta? He didn't want them. No, he really didn't want them. The contracts that he signed with DC at the time gave them the rights to. DC owns Watchmen and V for Vendetta, specifically owned Watchmen until it went out of print, which Moore is always quick to say, like, no graphic novel had ever stayed in print before. Karate points out in this video, though, that's not true, especially in Europe. There were volumes of, say, like Judge Dredd 2000 AD, and especially the European stuff, Tintin, Asterix, etc., which had a long history of staying in print forever and volumes. So he really knew nothing. This is where I'm saying, still, I'm willing to say, okay, you're a flaky artist, anarchist, and had no ideas, and they were waving a ton of money in your face. But no, he didn't want to give him the okay, and in fact asked for his name not to be used on them. I don't believe you're going to see Alan Moore's name on Watchmen or V for Vendetta the movie, and asked for the money that they got to be given to his co-creators, which is very generous and fuels this legend he's created, because he's kind of selective in the creators that he co-creators rather that he has bestowed his good graces upon to allow their work to be reprinted and make them a lot of money. And granted, a lot of it off of his name, Alan Moore's name being on the thing, but like those, he didn't just choose like jobbers out of nowhere. He chose great artists whose unique contributions are just tied so intimately to what those books are. You cannot say they are not true co-creators, or you'd go against everything like that Moore himself espoused about creator rights and Jack Kirby and Stan Lee and all that stuff, right? So again, this is not a hit piece on Moore. What we're watching feels like a hit piece, and we'll see a little later, like his language and especially his intonations make it seem like more like a hit piece. Okay, Larry says, I remember working at a comic store into 80s and completely not understanding what the big goddamn deal was about Watchmen, and in my opinion has only solidified over the years. Larry, I love you, buddy, but this is where we're going to part ways opinion-wise, because I'm just like, I believe Watchmen is a transcendent work of comics. It's not my favorite Alan Moore. I mean, it's way up there, but I mean, From Hell is just an amazing piece of literature, the likes of which I'd never seen. It changed my mind and ideas about life, as did Watchmen, like beyond just realistic superheroes, which is just the bare veneer on the outside of Watchmen. I think it was, and I bought the hype, but I bought it back in 89 or whenever I first read it. It's a community. I don't know what we're talking about. I gotta stay in touch with the chat because I'm losing the thread a little bit. It's a community. Yes, it is a community. I'm a progressive. I use the word liberal in a more classical academic. Yeah, the whole classical liberal thing is probably closest to what I would say I am, and many libertarians would say that. I'm a Palestinian libertarian, but I'm definitely not a far-right libertarian. I'm definitely more of a left-leaning anarchist style libertarian. I just believe that nobody who's able to become in charge is, if you're able to get to that level, you're already so corrupt that you can't possibly do that much good. Although I will say, I was just thinking about this morning when I talk about leadership. I think that's the only thing that's important about a president. And like Donald Trump was a terrible president, not for his policies, a lot of which were awful, some of which might have had some merit. He was an awful president because of his leadership, right? Because he's a divider, not a uniter. And didn't seem to do anything to want to materially improve people's lives. Barack Obama, on the other hand, I think was a good leader. Not a great president, mind you, but a better leader because, dude, he was, besides just being a better orator, he always attempted to unite, even when it didn't work. And Affordable Care Act, I think, is garbage, but it was an attempt to materially like improve people's lives. And for some people, it did. Some of the parts of the Affordable Care Act were great and deserved to stick around. El Crudo says anarchy is NorCal. It might be. It's more socialist up here, I think. Well, no, it is definitely more anarchist. Planet Lar, it's me and not you. Eddie Campbell's Bacchus is 1,000 times better than From Hell. You might be right. Because it's a singular vision, and I always prefer singular visions. And Eddie walks that line of illuminating and making you laugh at the same time. Like he walks it in a way like nobody else. Epicness, yet moments of like utter banality. All right, Larry, we found our common ground on Bacchus. Anarchy is very NorCal. You're right. And when I think about up here, it's funny because you think about, I'm in Arcata, right? And you think about it up here, you think hippies. But dude, there's as many or more anti-vaxxers here than there are in any conservative community. I'm not one of them. I'm vaccinated, all right? But that's what people don't get. It's distrust of government is the main reason people didn't want to get vaccinated, or just distrust of institutions. Trust of our institutions is at an all-time low, and this is where that's what everything is built on. Our economy is built on trust, right? The dollar is built on the full faith and credit of, you know, the United States government, but what has been going down and down and down for decades? Faith and essentially our credit with the world. We're headed towards a world where, mark my words, the end of the United States empire will be when the dollar is removed as the world reserve currency. And what will it be replaced by is the big question about where the next shift of power will be. All right. Have I lost enough people yet? Boo to me for getting into politics. Sorry, folks, but that's going to be my thing from now on. I'm just going to talk about what I want to talk about. Okay. It's pretty venomous language this guy uses in the vid. Basic thesis, he hasn't consented to republish work as it's denying other creators ongoing revenue, but doesn't he have the right not to indulge? You nailed it, peerless loser. You chose that name, not me. Hey, yeah, free Palestine, nice. This is the essence. This is the thing. They are co-copyright holders. Alan Moore absolutely holds the right. And for some creators, he's allowed. And for others, he has not allowed them. And that is well within his rights. Why he's doing it is the thing we can't know. Okay, we'll get more into the Alan Davis thing because I think that's the biggest that's the biggest piece that's missing here. Wait a minute, what have I got? Yeah, and when is Alan Moore coming to the show? That's a great question. I reached out to him and he's not. He doesn't want to talk about comics at all ever again, apparently, like the business, nothing about comics. And so he's not coming on the show. But what are you going to do? I can't control that. So wait a minute. I reached out to him, and to be honest, it was a pretty half-hearted pitch to him because I was pretty sure he wasn't going to come on. But I was just like, hey, Alan, let's just have a real conversation. We don't have to talk about comics or the past. Let's talk about the future. Let's talk about your books. Let's talk about whatever. He declined, which is fine. And that's why this is not a hate piece. I want to try and be fair about this thing because Peerless Loser nailed it, right? Like Moore has the right to do this. I will just say that it comes off as very petty for a guy in his position of regard and wealth to kind of spite people in this way. On the other hand, who knows what happened behind closed doors? The Alan Davis situation is the one that is the weirdest. Like, okay, for the Don Simpson situation, let's talk about In Pictopia for a second. Okay, so In Pictopia doesn't have the name Alan Moore on it. Wait a minute, let me hide the microphone. Doesn't have Alan Moore's name on it. And he won't let it. And but he did allow it to be published with new coloring. It's a beautiful, oversized edition. It really is lovely. It would have and definitely would continue to sell a lot more with Alan Moore's name on it. Now, the reason he could have, I believe, just not allowed this to be reprinted. They allowed it to be reprinted without Don's permission a couple of times in other places, Don told me. But he could have said no to this one, but allowed it. And this is less a slap to Don than it is to Gary Groff, the publisher of Fantagraphics, and who back when was the editor-in-chief of the Comics Journal. and apparently said some stuff, and they were like, "Oh, we don't know what he said. He said something." But dude, everybody knows if you read Gary Groff stuff, especially from that era, dude, the guy is an acid pen. He's so smart, so intelligent that he might have made comments that maybe even only an Alan Moore could have understood or understood it at a different level. I don't know. I mean, you can understand it, and he'll take digs, but he's not afraid to be very ruthless. And the Comics Journal is not afraid to pull any punches at all, which is one of the biggest reasons I respect him. Gary Groff has been on the show on a panel, and I have yet to bring him in individually because, like, I'm just afraid of, like, I don't know why I'm afraid of the guy. He's actually seems like a cool guy, like I might have a lot in common with. So I want to bring him in. Anyway, to me, this boils down to Alan has the right for these things, and he's choosing based on his relationships. Now, the Alan Davis situation, it's pretty clear. It's in the context of the video that, Alan Davis is a conservative guy, and we know Alan Moore is not. And that could have just right there, it could have been enough, but who knows what kind of personal digs were exchanged between the two in private. We don't have really any idea, except that apparently Alan allowed Alan Moore allowed Davis's work to be reprinted without ever having secured the rights to reprint it here in America. Supposedly, this is Cat Ironwood and I forget his name, the other dude, Dean Mullaney, and they just kind of published it without securing Alan Moore's rights to it. I believe he got paid for it, but they didn't ask his permission. And supposedly wires got crossed, and Alan never knew that Alan Davis never signed a contract and never had anything. This seems a little suspect, but it also could just be he completely washed his hands of Alan Davis, right? And has decided not to do anything. So, completely just said, I don't even want to think about him. You do your thing. I don't care. I still want my Miracle Man money, my Marvel Man money. Yeah. Oh yeah. Talking about, okay. Larry wants to know what reserve currency has to do with Star Trek. Not much until we get into Quatloos and the dilithium trade, Larry, which we're definitely talking about on Friday on Serious Star Trek. Okay, definitely gonna talk about that. Oh, also, hey, by the way, guys, Larry is coming in here. Yeah, let me put this up. Larry's coming in this Thursday. We're doing another $1 million mailbox. I've got a big stack of stuff, including I'm definitely going to get the stuff from Jerome Cabanatan, some Kung Fu Karate comics. If you want to see your stuff on the $1 Million Comic Cam, please just send it in to the $1 Million Mailbox, P.O. Box 1163, Arcata, California, 95518. We'll put it up on the camera, and I'll do it more justice than I will this video. I was originally going to play the whole thing, and I'm definitely going to play more here. But, I don't want to steal any views from Mike Crotty, so you definitely got to check him out. Maybe I'll put the, let me put the URL on the screen or something, too, so we can make this thing happen. Here, yeah, you can go check out the video here. I'm going to play a little bit more.
He is now thankfully working in the more genteel and nobler film industry, having cut his teeth working on an abandoned Electric Comics project with Hewlett-Packard, whose very publicized dalliances with fraud, bribery, and human rights violation didn't deter him from setting up with them. Savvy at the time of signing his one-man contract in 1985, he had been a man.
Wait, I'm going to skip ahead a little bit
until 2000, when he was working for DC on a new edition and toys to ensure the brand's value to DC well into the new millennium. Moore's supposed naive ignorance concerning contracts being on a par with ignorant fans and non-journalistic comic site journalists doesn't even stand up to the most cursory scrutiny. It depends on his co-creators, who also signed these contracts, being equally ignorant or gullible. His Watchmen co-creator, artist Dave Gibbons, however, has never complained about DC's contract, let alone publicly accused DC of swindling or stealing from him, while his V for Vendetta co-creator, artist David Lloyd, has stated that he is very happy with the results of what DC have done with it. I have no complaints. Moore himself even undermined his current ignorance excuses as early as 1986, when he referred to specific minor contract details in a then famous row with DC about whether Watchmen pin badges were promotional or a merchandise item which he would profit from when he was first promoting the book. The issue was resolved by DC quickly in Moore's favor. Remember, he now states he didn't look at the contract closely for 25 years. In fact, Moore was actually very contract savvy at the time of signing his One Ditchman contract in 1985. He had been a member of the Society of Strip Illustration for several years. The SSI was an organization for professionals in the comic strip industry that met regularly in London, both socially and for networking, and formally for lectures, discussions, and newsletter articles on copyright, syndication, and contracts. V for Vendetta artist David Lloyd was even chairman of the society, while Moore worked with him at the same time that he was signing his DC contracts. Despite all the interviews he's given as a victim of a duplicitous contract that he never looked at, except for when he did regarding the Watchmen badges, Moore was actually already adept in contracts, copyrights, and creators' rights, as he proved in 1984 when he was amending contracts concerning the copyright and ownership of Marvel Man for himself and his colleagues. He also showcased his comprehensive knowledge of the industry's contracts in a letter he sent in September 1984 to Marvel UK's managing director and publisher, Robert Sutherland. Moore sent the letter on both his and co-creator Alan Davis's behalf, though without consulting or even informing Alan Davis. And it was regarding their contracts for Marvel UK, clarifying specifically their creators' rights and reprints regarding copyright and the irrelevance of any verbal agreement under British copyright law. In the same letter, he generously also offered to provide any additional information Sutherland might require to clear up any confusion he might have had over contractual rights and copyright laws. Though Moore wrote the letter as if it was from himself and Alan Davis, again, he never consulted with or informed Alan Davis about it. This was a year before he now states the Watchmen contract was the first he'd ever seen.
And this is confirmed by Alan Davis and is through his wife, I believe. All this stuff, none of it is disputed by Davis, although none of it is fleshed out with details as to the what the real bone of contention between the two was. Now, Karate's going to go on to say that this was just Alan Moore hating Jim Shooter of all people. So let's continue.
3 creators essentially signed the Watchmen contract, and 2 of them, Gibbons and Lloyd, who Moore says he convinced to sign the same deal for V for Vendetta, despite now stating he never properly read the contract. I've never had any issue with it. V for Vendetta co-creator David Lloyd's current recollection contradicts Moore's many accounts. I have no memory of Alan selling me a Watchmen contract. It was just what we were presented with as co-owners, and I accepted it in full knowledge of the reversion clause. And that the contract was clear enough to me and was accepted by me at the time that it was signed, and it seemed similarly fine by Alan. Lloyd doesn't recall Moore ever communicating any concerns over the contract with him, despite subsequently regularly attacking it in the press since the V for Vendetta's film's release. Though he has subsequently referred to assurances being given and broken promises regarding his Watchmen contract, it's clear that Moore knew full well that verbal agreements were worth the paper they were written on. He was also expert enough in contractual rights prior to signing his Watchmen contract that in 1984, once he was lucratively employed by DC Comics and assured of forthcoming work, including Watchmen, he was able to surreptitiously and unilaterally deprive his co-creator and equal partner Alan Davis of the revenue and exposure Marvel Comics reprinting their strip Captain Britain in the US would bring as an act of personal revenge against another individual Davis had no connection with. In the only verifiable instance of cheating, swindling, and stealing of creators' rights involving Moore, he was actually the instigator, and his then closest co-creator was the victim. Prior to Watchmen in 1984, Moore and artist Alan Davis had worked together for 3 years on 6 critically acclaimed series in the UK: Captain Britain, Marvel Man, DR and Quinch, Future Shock, Star Wars, and Night Raven. In the summer of 1983, a delegation from US publisher DC came to London to headhunt some of the UK's best talent to work for them, and Moore was amongst those hired. By 1984, he had already secured much more lucrative US comics works from DC with the monthly Swamp Thing comic and several other DC projects, including one featuring the recently acquired Charlton Comics company characters, which would become the Watchmen. As his US workload increased, Moore began quitting his considerably poor paid UK work. Even though his artwork was on most of the stories that got Moore hired by the US, Davis wasn't hired by DC in 1983, despite taking the extremely risky step of quitting his full-time factory job to focus on his comics career. In late 1984, Davis learned that Marvel US wanted to reprint the Captain Britain strips. This would have afforded him both his first exposure in the US comics market, as well as some financial stability and reprint fees. But unbeknownst to him, Moore had secretly killed the deal without discussing it with him or even subsequently informing him. But worse was to come. Despite them speaking regularly at this time in person and over the phone, it was months before Davis learned of Moore's actions in early 1985. To make matters worse, Davis states that he learned it from a mutual friend that the only reason Moore did this was he felt Marvel editor-in-chief Jim Shooter had disrespected him when he visited the US Marvel offices in August 1984. Davis said,
Okay, this sounds very plausible, not just in the fact that Alan Moore or Shooter would treat Moore with disrespect, but then also that Moore would take it so personally. Definitely, this rings true to me.
As he was told, Shooter said to Moore he wasn't really a fan of his Swamp Thing as it was too Stephen Kingish, and he much preferred his Captain Britain work, which he wanted to reprint. Once Moore returned to the UK and confirmed he had more DC work commissioned, he said about killing the Captain Britain reprints despite Shooter, regardless of the serious collateral damage to his co-creator's livelihood and career. This was an attribute he would use again and again against other co-creators. As bizarre as Davis's account for Moore's pay.
Okay, now he did have, I believe it could not have been published without both of their permission. So he definitely had the right to do this, regardless of under UK law. he didn't have the right to unilaterally give away Davis's rights, though. So this is where he is. I'm not sure what's going on here. Maybe I got to bring in our pal who's a copyright expert to come talk about this.
Eddie and Cruel Actions is. It's the only one that actually stands up to any scrutiny. Publicly, there is a myriad of laudable reasons attributed to Moore by himself and his supporters for opposing the Marvel Captain Britain reprints. Moore has offered 3 very different, factually impossible explanations in the multiple interviews biographies, where he is always either a victim or a hero. One excuse is that he refused the reprint and quit working for Marvel in solidarity with a colleague who was fired, knowing how that would reflect on Davis, who didn't quit. It's a commendable excuse that he uses in several interviews, telling Lance Parkin in 2013, "As I remember it, when Bernie J was fired, we were both of us filled with young man's testosterone, you know. We both really liked Bernie, and as I remember it, we were both saying, well, that's it for us in Marvel." Unsurprisingly, from a master like Moore, it's an admirable account, which casts him in a noble light, and Davis, not so much, but it's utterly untrue. The colleague referred to as Bernie J, his and Alan Davis's editor on Captain Britain, and she wasn't fired. J chose to leave the role for other pursuits in November 1983, and this was acknowledged at the time by both Marvel and Moore and Davis, who wrote and illustrated a humorous good luck strip, printed by her employers Marvel UK, bemoaning her decision to leave them. Also, Moore did not leave Captain Britain for another 7 months, until June 1984 when he quit all his UK work. Moore subsequently visited Marvel in New York and had an introductory.
That doesn't mean that he wasn't pissed about her getting canned and that any of the higher ups knew anything about that strip being published like that. Who knows?
Meeting with the editor-in-chief Jim Shooter in August 1984, almost a year after he subsequently claimed to have cut all ties with them, and a month before he wrote to Marvel UK's Robert Sutherland concerning Captain Britain's copyright. Author and authority on Marvel Man, Miracle Man, George Corey, who wrote the Eisner-nominated Commode in 2001, interviewed Moore and presented another factually impossible excuse.
Wait a minute, I want to back that up for a second, because this is where his tone really comes into play. Let me put it into normal speed for a second here so I can do this.
Interviewed Moore and presented another Eisner-nominated on Marvel Man, Miracle Man. Author and authority on Marvel Man, Miracle Man, George Corey, who wrote the Eisner-nominated Commode in 2001. Interviewed Moore and presented another factually impossible excuse.
Great book. I loved it. I don't have it anymore. I definitely read it and loved it. Took it as gospel.
Corey's book stated that in 1984, Marvel were going to print, or did print, Corey's tenses vary in his fictional retelling, some more Doctor Who stories without his consent. And this injustice was the reason that Moore shafted his friend and co-creator. Corey writes, "Well, a problem arose that would affect the bond between Moore and Davis. By 1984, word had gotten out of Marvel US that a few old Moore Doctor Who stories were to be reprinted, done without his consent. Copyright are extremely different between the United States and England, and it appears that Moore has ownership of his Marvel work and the right to refuse any request in regards to reprinting any work he did for Marvel Comics. Once Marvel Comics did this injustice, Moore's principals would never allow him to work for the company again. Somehow, friction developed between Moore and Davis regarding the Marvel issue. Davis is a more conservative thinker and apparently felt that there was other ways to confront Marvel, but Moore was solid about his position on the issue."
That sentence speaks a lot of volumes. Davis was more conservative and had different ideas. That right there just goes like, who that could be so much, especially if you consider in today's context what that could mean. But when you think about somebody with Alan Moore at that time and what his politics were like, and how Alan Davis was like a factory working conservative type dude, and then the fact that he allowed some Doctor Who to be reprinted, but not Alan Davis's, like that, and it was within his right, but it just seems specifically spiteful. To which say, yes, you have the right, but it's not a good look.
None of this was true. Comics historian Corey somehow forgot that Moore had axed Captain Britain without discussing it or informing Davis in late 1984, and that no Alan Moore Doctor Who work was ever reprinted until November 1985. Presumably, Moore forgot to axe that reprint, which was drawn by his V for Vendetta co-creator and co-owner David Lloyd. Corey also forgot that Moore's principals did allow him to work for the company again, just not for Jim Shooter or with Captain Britain. And although Corey had interviewed Alan Davis concerning the rift between him and Moore, he felt it best to excise all of Alan Davis's contributions, apart from his artwork, which he used without Davis's permission, and rely on...
Okay, that is extremely damning on Corey, if not more by proxy. One, excising the stuff, great, but then using the work without permission. This all brings up, why did Alan Davis not sue over these slides, which I would think he could have. Perhaps there's a statute of limitations that's expired. Maybe not. I don't know.
Instead of just Moore's account and things that never happened to support Moore's lies in his Eisner-nominated Komoda. Corey sums up Moore's split with Davis as follows. Writer note, in 1995, Moore relented to the reprinting of the Captain Britain stories as a gesture of friendship to Alan Davis, his first major collaborator. Much brighter, but equally utterly untrue. Moore's other commendable excuse for screwing over his colleague is more complex than the others, but equally false. In several interviews, he claims he refused US Marvel permission to reprint Captain Britain over their insistence, which he saw as bullying, a phrase he likes to use repeatedly against others, that Marvel Man be renamed over Marvel's copyright of the word Marvel. Except Marvel never said the character's name had to be changed. In September 1984, Marvel UK solicitor sent a letter to Des Skin, editor and owner of the UK publishers of Marvel Man, in Warrior magazine, instructing them.
To me, by the way, this is the weakest part of the argument here. This is like, of course they're going to get sued if they try to publish a comic called Marvel Man. Of course. Call that bullying, if you will, but the law's the law. Marvel's going to go try to protect their trademarks, right? Their trademarks. You have to go after and protect your trademarks, as opposed to copyright, where you can let it slide and you don't lose the rights. But if in their eyes, there was probably no doubt Marvel was going to pursue action.
Not to use the word Marvel on their covers, as it was getting confused in shops with UK Marvel publications with Marvel in their titles. The letter, sent to Quality Publications, the publisher of Warrior, never instructed or even alluded that the character name Marvel Man couldn't be used, as Moore would later fictionally frame it for promotional and publicity purposes. It didn't impact Moore's plans for the character going forward. It just instructed Des Skin's Quality Publications not to produce any new titles with the word Marvel on the cover for UK retail. Moore had actually already quit working for Quality Publications months earlier, and despised Skin at the time to the extent of trying to assault and never talk to him again. And this was despite Skin hiring Moore for his dream job, ensuring whether kosher or not that Moore had some ownership and profited from Marvel Man's IP. And according to Padraig O'Malley's comprehensive history of Marvel Man, named Poison Chalice, he lent Moore a sizable amount of money to help him stay in comics. Des Skin confirmed O'Malley's account to me. I had agreed to lend him a considerable amount of money so he could afford to provide for his family while he struggled to find sufficient work to justify comics as a career. In spite of neither creating or owning the 1950s Marvel Man character, nor even being referenced in the legal letter, Moore says this letter led to him severing all ties with bullying Marvel, including the Captain Britain reprints. Telling biographer George Curry, "It was over the Marvel Man thing that I decided I wouldn't work with any kind of version of Marvel Man in the future." Later in a 2010 interview with Padraig O'Malley, he even refers to letting Marvel know that this was the reason via a dead witness, Marvel editor Archie Goodwin. I didn't like it.
All of this stuff is very ironic considering they didn't really even have the rights to use the name Marvel Man. And it was owned by the original Golden Age creator, Mick Anglo, who only in recent years did Marvel. He got awarded that, and then Marvel made sure to pay him a bunch of money. He's a real old dude.
I didn't like submitting to the bullying, but apparently yes. Archie Goodwin had said, Alan Moore's not going to be working for Marvel in any way, or letting us reprint Captain Britain, unless we ease up on the Marvel Man deal. Several facts undermine Moore's anti-bullying stance as the reason for his ill treatment of his longest-serving colleague and Captain Britain co-creator Alan Davis. Skin, the publisher of Marvel Man, had already decided a year earlier to change the name for the US, having realized on a trip there in 1983 to sell the strip that no publisher, including Marvel, was interested in publishing a comic with the confusing Marvel in the title. If any was responsible for the name change from Marvel Man,
Duh!
it wasn't Marvel. It was in fact the US comics publisher Pacific Comics, who were originally going to reprint it in the US. And Moore was aware of this for almost a year before Marvel UK solicitor letters were sent to Des Skin's Quality Publications. Despite all of Moore's public abhorrence of Marvel's bullying, while publicizing the relaunch or excusing his treatment of Alan Davis or just attacking Marvel, he never once reached out to Skin, who was the only person to receive the letters, for clarification or details, or to offer his support to the only person contacted in any way, shape, or form by Marvel. Skin recalls, I have to confess to being disappointed that Alan Moore offered no support whatsoever when I received the Marvel UK letters. Whatever his personal feelings were at the time, this was such a high-profile property which affected the income of others than himself. Ironically, the name change to Miracle Man was in fact Moore's own idea. In his original pitch for Marvel Man in 1981 to Skin, he suggested changing the title to Miracle Man should any copyright issues arise, or if they were unable to secure permission to revamp the character from his original creator and owner Mick Anglo. Moore's Archie Goodwin tale doesn't stand up to any scrutiny, though sadly Goodwin was no longer able to give his own account when Moore used him to validate his own. As was pointed out in the comic section of the website that ran this story twice, Heidi McDonald's The Beat, Robert Stanley Martin wrote in the comments, I actually think it's worse that you're printing gossip-based attack on people without checking things out with those who have first-hand knowledge of the situation. However, if you want to be irresponsible and spread misinformation, I suppose that's your call. And if Heidi McDonald wants to print it, that's on her. And Martin was correct. Most definitive or authoritative accounts of events surrounding Moore, the only person whose account is promoted is that of Moore's. often by excising or ignoring the testimony of others, or in the case of the late Archie Goodwin, being used as a silent prop in Moore's fantastical account. The simple verifiable facts are Captain Britain wasn't part of Archie Goodwin's editorial turf, and he would know the trademark issue wasn't Shooter's call. Goodwin would also know it was Marvel president James Galton who was the only person at Marvel who could have any influence in the matter. Moore's defamatory account also depends on accepting that Moore had just a year earlier contacted the relevant UK copyrights department.
Thank you.
Or
It's
Marvel
back
UK,
now. I was
Robert
muted.
Sullivan, to secretly cancel any Captain Britain reprints in advance.
Thank you.
Felt that telling an editor who had nothing to do with the Marvel Man issue and no reason to be involved was better than contacting the folks he'd previously secretly dealt with.
Better now, right?
Rights. As for his noble vow to never work for Marvel again in any way, shape, or form, it turns out that wasn't true either. Moore went on to do exactly what he states he never did, and worked for Marvel's Epic magazine in November 1985. His clandestine actions, which could have destroyed his closest co-creator's career, were personal, petty, and against a single individual, Jim Shooter, who Moore later referred to as Führer, despite it.
Is this not like the creepiest picture of all time? Like Jim Shooter. Wow, what a scary looking dude. Yeah, voice is back. Sorry, guys. Now I got mad echoes, huh? I'll work on it.
Only meeting him once and never working for him. But like his career, Moore's screwing over of co-creators was only just beginning. It was in early 1985, the same time as he was signing the Watchmen contract, that Moore facilitated the actual swindling and theft of Alan Davis's work. At that time, Davis said he still considered him a good friend. They had spoken several times since he had quit his UK titles, with Moore recommending his best friend from school, Jamie Delano, to take over writing Captain Britain. They spoke about working for DC, the US page race, and in all that time, Moore never mentioned cancelling the US Captain Britain reprints. As soon as Davis found out, he phoned Moore, asking him to reconsider or at the very least explain himself. According to Davis, Moore tried to justify his actions with rambling nonsense he knew wasn't true. He'd heard directly from Moore's pal Delano, who actually collected Moore from his New York Jim Shooter meeting trip and drove him home, that it was over a perceived Jim Shooter snub. Davis told Moore to undo the damage he'd done. That was the last time Moore ever spoke to him, Davis says, which is another common experience with his co-creators. And Moore carried on launching the series Miracle Man. They were currently co-creators on and held equal rights and ownership to. Davis felt he only had one recourse, to show Moore the effect refusing permission to reprint had on a co-creator. Just before Miracle Man was due to be published in the US, Davis sent him 2 letters to his home, by both standard and registered post. Registered post means it has to be signed for by the recipient. This was July 1985. He told Moore he was refusing any and all permission for any of his Marvel Man artwork to be reprinted, as well as any of the characters he had designed to be used in future issues. Davis.
So, guys, this is the thing. I hope my audio is a little bit better. I got to figure out the situation with my audio when I'm playing videos. This is some of the technical details I struggle with on a day-to-day basis. So the thing that I'm just gonna say, the idea about good, yeah. It's probably when I muted my microphone. The thing here is that in the rights to the name situation, I just don't care. Who cares? Obviously, Marvel was going to sue, so that's off the table. The treating of Alan Davis. Now, to withhold the rights to reprint something because you don't like your co-creator is legally legitimate, and I just a little shady. But to not like to publish his work without his permission is pretty inexcusable. I'm going to try playing this again, guys, and tell me now how the video audio sounds. I'm going to play it again.
It's made clear he had not signed any contract with Eclipse, the US publishers, allowing them to reprint his work. And he still genuinely believes at this stage, with one reprint in limbo and another one about to join it because of Moore's actions, that Alan would back down. At that time, I still thought he was a friend who was acting like a temperamental child. I never thought he was capable of what he subsequently did. Davis's letters, by way of a knowledge branch and solution to the impasse, pointed specifically to Moore's own refusal of the Captain Britain reprints as the sole cause for his own reciprocation, unequivocally making it clear that Alan Moore could resolve the standoff he'd created. Moore ignored the letters, though the fact that it was registered proves he received it. And despite knowing that Davis had refused permission and wasn't being paid a penny, worked on, wrote new material for, and promoted all of the Miracle Man issues featuring Davis's stolen artwork. And he even wrote new stories featuring the characters Alan Davis had designed. Years later, when Moore had wrapped up his Miracle Man story, having been paid and received some royalties for all the issues that Davis also worked on, featuring the characters that he co-created without any payment, he gave the series and Davis's co-created characters to his friend Neil Gaiman to continue. In his own origin story, anarchist Moore always blames others, which is another constant.
I'll get the hang of this, guys. What I was going to say is this seems cut and dried. Like, why wouldn't Davis have sued? If he really had the rights, if Moore didn't have the rights and Davis's rights were being violated, he should have been able to sue for a lot of money. One, did he? Two, did he know he should have? Did he fail to do so or just not want to do so? Not want to make the situation worse? Not a litigious person? That I can respect. Because he's always stayed pretty quiet about this stuff, too. He could have made it more of a stink about it. And I have to think somebody would have heard of it. It just seems like he was very conservative in demeanor. And who cares about his politics? But, like, he's, like, very kept on the down low about this thing.
Moore's recollection of events that could possibly reflect negatively on him. He blames the editor and publisher of Miracle Man, stating that they somehow tricked him into thinking Davis had happily signed a contract, committing to the exact opposite of what he personally informed Moore he was doing and why. While the publisher's eclipse dubiously claimed that they had a contract from Skin, allowing them to reprint the series, the truth remains that Moore was the only person in the process who knew that no such contract had been or even would be signed by Davis, exactly why Davis refused any reprint or use of his Marvel Man work, how to redress him, and Moore was the only person on Earth who could do so. For decades, subsequently, Moore has lied about this and defamed others, including Davis himself.
This is shady, though. Shady that he would do it, but shady that Davis didn't do anything.
In an interview with Kurthemacher in 2009, Moore says, "They had made certain promises to me that I wanted to be absolutely sure that the artist at the time, Alan Davis, was happy about his work being reprinted. And I told them I could not commence writing any new work until they had got that affirmation. They finally left it until the last minute and then asked me why I hadn't got the new Marvel Man work in, at which point I reiterated my request for some proof that Alan Davis was okay about the whole thing. They said they were getting this proof, and they really needed me to start work, that this proof existed, that it was on its way, and they would be showing it to me as soon as possible. I started work because I believed they were telling the truth. I later found out this was not the case." Speaking to Podrigo Maloid in 2010, Moore states, I wanted something on paper that said Alan Davis was okay with everything. And they promised me faithfully that they had got this paperwork or they were getting it. And if I could just start writing, then they would be getting it to me. They never got it to me because it didn't exist. And I felt that Alan Davis had probably felt that I was party to screwing him, which was not the case and was regrettable. In yet another interview, this time at Lance Parkin in 2013, he decided to insult Davis, making his
Oh, my God. I'm an idiot, guys. I'm just saying, Peerless Loser is not without peer because I'm the loser today, audio-wise. I just think that they're suing. Davis could have and should have sued, and Moore did not have the right. You still can't hear me? Now you hear me. No, yes, no, yes or no. I'm sorry, guys. This is really rough. I'm having a rough time with this. Yeah, I know. I did turn it on again. I think it's on. I'm on. Yes. Okay, good. So I apologize, guys. I'm getting the streaming jitters here. Yeah, good. So let's go back.
failed attempt to avoid screwing all the more admiral. Wanted to be absolutely sure that the artist at the time, Alan Davis, was happy about his work being reprinted. And I told them I could not commence writing any new work until they had got that affirmation. They finally left it until the last minute and then asked me why I hadn't got the new Marvel Man work in, at which point I reiterated my request for some proof that Alan Davis was okay about the whole thing. They said they were getting this proof, and they really needed me to start work, that this proof existed, that it was on its way, and they would be showing it to me as soon as possible. I started work because I believed they were telling the truth.
Okay, so this strikes me as true if he did not want to talk to Moore at all. But like Peerless Loser said, they just had such a rift that Moore had totally written him off and was not willing to communicate with him in any way. That seems likely, in which case the villain here is Cat Ironwood and Dean Mulaney hiding the truth from Moore to get him to continue, probably with the idea that they were going to secure the rights and make it happen and pay Davis. I'm guessing this is where I still do not understand why Davis didn't sue, because he clearly could have.
Later found out this was not the case. Speaking to Padraig O'Malley in 2010, Moore states, I wanted something on paper that said Alan Davis was okay with everything. And they promised me faithfully that they had got this paperwork or they were getting it. And if I could just start writing, then they would be getting it to me. They never got it to me because it didn't exist. And I felt that Alan Davis had probably felt that I was party to screwing him, which was not the case and was regrettable. In yet another interview, this time at Lance Parkin in 2013, he decided to insult Davis, making his own failed attempts to avoid screwing him all the more admirable. By this time, I was mired with Eclipse. I wasn't in contact with Alan Davis, and I was totally at the mercy of what I was being told by Eclipse editors Kat Uronwood and Dean Mullaney. Genuinely, the reason I was sticking over delivering new work to Eclipse was because while I didn't much like Alan Davis at that point, and I thought he was a bit of a grumpy person who I hadn't got any interest in talking to again, I didn't want him to be cheated. I didn't want anyone to be cheated, even though Moore doesn't elaborate on why he felt the need to demean his co-creator, other than to make himself all.
Nobody wants to talk with a grumpy person. This tells me Davis is really pissed. Feels like his rights were violated and were.
More noble in his fruitless efforts to stop Davis being cheated whilst knowingly cheating him. Moore's supporters can now at least understand why Alan Davis might have been a bit grumpy. Unlike Moore, who's given dozens of interviews about his travails, Davis only consented to speak about the events now, as he says he was surprised someone finally figured it out. He contributed interviews and materials to both Padraig O'Malley and George Corey's books, but he found out later his responses had been edited by the authors without his knowledge or permission, so as not to offend or cast Moore in a bad light. Moore's much defamed editor, Catherine Uronwood, replied to the author Padraig O'Malley in the comment section of Heidi McDonald's The Beat's website, denying Alan Moore's account ever happened and explaining in comprehensive detail why it possibly couldn't have. Padraig O'Malley diligently ignored her detailed dismissal, and he supported Moore's lies in his published book, contrary to all the other parties' proof, as he says he didn't like her, despite never meeting or interviewing her. I recently asked O'Malley over Twitter, who interviewed both Moore and Davis for the comprehensive book on Miracle Man, A Poison Chalice, why he didn't focus on any of the facts revealed to him by Davis or Catherine Uronwood that reflected negatively on Moore. O'Malley responded that the reason he blamed others, didn't confront or even correct Moore, was he didn't want to disagree with him, and he wouldn't report any damaging facts about people who are friends of mine in a supposedly factually comprehensive book.
This says a lot. That says a lot. I think that's true. People didn't want to piss the guy off. If you have access to him and he's known to completely cut off access to people for even the smallest of slights, then you're not, if you're writing a book and want to have access to the guy and continued access, you're not going to print bad stuff about him. I could also imagine Moore being completely manipulative of the public's impression of him too. He's a sorcerer after all. People didn't even have email then. Laugh all out. You called somebody up and said, should we do it? And they said, yeah, let's do it. I could easily imagine this scenario. Yeah, it seems there's a stuff unspoken here, because imagine this. In this scenario, Alan is a vindictive guy, but in the scenario where, or Alan Moore is rather, but imagine the scenario where Alan Davis is a complete asshole. And he calls you up screaming and yelling and saying whatever about what, like, it's the context is so key to what you believe here, that this is ultimately like a he said, she said, except for the fact that Davis definitely got screwed out of his rights at the time. I certainly hope that he got paid for that.
Moore has now cut off all contact with his friend over something he wrote, although O'Malley admits he doesn't know what. He didn't want to upset Moore by disagreeing with him. For someone who held his own false travails against bullying, Moore has an extremely long history of employing it, especially against those who don't have his means or stock with the media to defend themselves. Davis's treatment was the most egregious, but his Swamp Thing and John Constantine, and also Inspiration Between DR and Quinch series, co-creator and former friend Steve Bissett says Moore will allow a creator-owned series he wrote, 1963,
friend of the show,
others worked on and would benefit from, be reprinted purely to spite Bissett. As a penciler on Swamp Thing, Bissett was one of Moore's first US co-creators. He even hosted Moore in his home on Moore's very first US trip. Without Bissett, two of Moore's most lucrative creator-owned works might not exist. He commissioned and funded Moore and artist Eddie Campbell and Moore's future wife Melinda Gebbie to produce From Hell and Lost Girls for his own anthology magazine Taboo. From Hell, one of Moore's most popular works with artist Eddie Campbell, in particular owes its existence to the fact that Bissett turned down an initial submission by Moore, a sardonically comedic piece. Bissett states it didn't fit Taboo's more extreme horror genre goals. Bissett recalls his role in the genesis of From Hell. He proposed and even made the icebreaker initial phone call to Campbell as the artist for the project. Even after the project moved on to other publishers, Bissett still supported it. After From Hell's legal situation and publishing commitments became hopelessly tangled and vanished from Moore's mind, it wasn't Moore but Bissett who encouraged Eddie Campbell to regain control and ownership to reprint the work. Despite his midwifery, Bissett never received nor ever sought any of the millions of dollars those works generated. He took pains to ensure the creators of the work he commissioned had full ownership and rights. But when it came to reprinting 1963, which both Moore and Bissett worked on and owned, with almost a dozen other creators, Moore refused permission. Apparently,
guys, yeah, Peerless Loser says that Bissett feels like a really sincere guy in interviews too. Yeah, I interviewed him on this show. We talked about this, and it's based on some pretty tame, harmless comments that Bissett made in a comics Journal interview. I believe it was Comics Journal. But again, it's hard to say. Relationships. I know what Steve said, and I trust what he said, that he said something that could have been perceived as negative, and that was enough that Moore cut him off. And say what you want, people have the right to do that. It just doesn't strike me as a nice thing to do.
Apparently, he has never clarified, which is a common occurrence. He objected to something Bissett said in an interview which Bissett courteously sent him in advance for any corrections, revisions, or deletions he might consider necessary before publishing, which was a courtesy Bissett extended to almost everyone mentioned in the interview. Moore didn't respond and told Bissett he never wanted to speak to him again. Constantly described by his supporters and himself as deeply and morally principled, Moore, true to his anarchist beliefs, turned the other cheek in light of Bissett's interview, and then he turned it back again. Not to contradict or even correct Bissett, but to do everything he could publicly and punitively to damage Bissett. And as a consequence, several other creators who played no part in whatsoever anything that was said that offended Moore. By punishing Bissett for an unknown transgression, all the dozen or so other artists and contributors are collateral in Moore's revenge, denied any reprint exposure fees and royalties, while Moore continues to reap the benefit from those 2 creator-owned series Bissett commissioned and paid Moore for, all the way to this day. Amongst those denied.
I'm not sure how Moore continues to reap benefits from them, since they were maybe just career benefits that happened because he agreed to do 1963, right? Never got finished. Moore will not allow this to be reprinted. Now, this is costing Rick Veitch, Dave Gibbons, and Steve Bissett, and Don Simpson real money that they could use for their retirement and their old age and whatever. And that, honestly, it's the type of money that probably Moore doesn't need, although it's a considerable chunk of change, because I'm guessing he would get 50% or something like that. I don't know what the actual deal. I'll have to ask Steve about that. This is unfortunate to me, and this is also a work that many people want to see. It's also, I found out recently, okay, and it's in this video. I think I found it out. Let's just continue. Maybe they'll
Income, a 1963 reprint will bring her Dave Gibbons, Rick Veitch, John Paladin, Don Simpson, Chester Brown, Jim Valentino, Roxanne Starr, and industry veteran Murphy Anderson, who did all the production and color separations to epitomize the Marvel Comics color and printing appearance of the 60s. Anderson was a Golden Age great. He embellished some of the most memorable DC covers of the period, and primarily aimed at Kurt Swan's pencils, a team-up earning them the Swanderson moniker. Aside from his iconic art, Anderson was a technical innovator who renovated DC's production, separation, and printing processes to better reflect his colleagues' and peers' artwork. Anderson worked on the separations and film production of every issue of 1963, and he was due remunerations from any reprints using his work. Murphy Anderson died in 2015, after Moore had twice cancelled reprinting the series out of spite against Bissett. Moore's own words: "This is the gangster ethics that I was just talking about after seeing great creators going to their graves, cheated and disillusioned." Artist Rick Veitch revealed in an interview with the Comics Cube in November 2020 that Moore suffered a self-induced mini-nervous breakdown after experimenting.
Shout out to the Comics Cube, my pal Dweetano from the Comics Kayfabe Facebook group. I reached out to Dwee to let him know that he had been cited by Comics Cube, and he said, by that dude, this guy is kind of like treated him in a really weird, he got a weird vibe off him a little bit. And I could sense it. He's got a chip on his shoulder that's under the surface here. That's, it's maybe understandable if he had some personal connection. He just sounds so personal to me, to him. And maybe he's just the world's biggest Alan Davis fan. It's possible. There's a lot of us out there.
And I think it was psychedelic drugs towards the end of the 1963 project. And he disappeared for weeks without any explanation to his co-creators, who were awaiting scripts to meet publishing deadlines. Bissett, however, never referred to or revealed this, but actually stated in the Comics Journal interview that Moore seemed at times to disregard the 1963 projects and his friends and fellow creators and co-owners, while he managed to write single-issue work-for-hire scripts for six-figure sums. This is what Bissett believes Moore ended their friendship over, and is punitively punishing him and all the other creators, even though it's true. Moore is also preventing Bissett from reprinting anything they both own that they worked on together, such as the acclaimed Mirror of Love, which Bissett co-created with Moore and Rick Veitch. After Moore denied the 1963 creators permission to reprint their work in 1998, in 2003, Top Shelf approached Bissett and Veitch on Moore's behalf for permission to rework the Mirror of Love with another artist. In the interest of fostering good relations, both agreed. Moore produced a new prestige edition with visuals by Jose Villarrubia in hardcover and softcover in multiple languages, which excised all of Veitch and Bissett's credits from the new adaptation of their work. Though Moore conceived and wrote Mirror of Love specifically,
that just seems like a big FU.
Page comic strip. He's been happy to participate with its adaptation into a plain musical theater book of photographs, despite his publicly avowed principled hatred of comics adaptations. After the new Mirror of Love deal, Veitch and Bissett approached publisher Dynamite about reprinting 1963, with the understanding that Moore would allow it, but without his name appearing anywhere in connection to it. 2009, After thousands of dollars had been spent scanning in the artwork and commissioning a brand new Alex Ross cover, Moore changed his mind and decided at the last minute to kill the reprint without giving any reason or explanation.
The only reason I like this is because the publisher of Dynamite is such a douchebag.
While Moore now claims he quit working for DC over the Watchmen contract, when this retroactive version of history has been bolstered by all his supporters, sycophantic journalists, reporters, biographers, and interviewers, this is untrue. He very publicly and very famously at the time quit working for DC in 1987 over a proposed labeling rating system that subsequently wasn't even introduced. Moore even spoke in glowing terms about his Watchmen contract, as well as its possible adaptations into other media, in a proposal for a new series for DC called Twilight in late 1986, which DC turned down shortly before Moore quit working for them, apparently over an unrelated matter. Moore wrote, "Ideally, it might be even possible, while appealing to the diehard superhero junkie, to produce a central story idea, simple, powerful, and resonant enough to bear translation to other media. I mean, I know that I'm probably still intoxicated by the Watchmen deal, but it never hurts to allow for these things as a possibility, does it? Subsequently..."
That's pretty telling. Like, he was into all the merchandising ideas and stuff that were in the Watchmen deal that he later said he didn't like. So that seems a little contradictory. Not a hanging offense.
DC, under pressure publicly from a censor-happy political and public caucus, announced it was introducing a rating system for its title, and Moore used this as an excuse to quit, writing in the Comics Buyer's Guide in February 1987. "With the conclusion of the work that I am actually contracted to do, I shall be producing their work in the future for any publisher imposing a rating system upon its creators and readers." Even though DC did not adopt the rating system, something still caused Moore to cease working for the company that just turned down his self-described merchandise and media-friendly Twilight proposal. In a later interview with the Comics Journal in November 1987, Moore stated, "DC reiterated their stance upon the rating system, which seemed to me to indicate they had no intention of changing their position. And when that became clear, I simply quit. It was as simple as that. I certainly didn't want at any point to indulge in any form of moral terrorism." In 1991, he repeated this, and even conceded that his Watchmen contract facilitated his being able to quit. I don't own one.
I'm going to skip forward a little bit here. So clearly it's personal. Yeah, as Peerless Loser says, there seems to be a personal stake on the narrator's part, but there's a personal thing with Moore here and the creator. So that's why this thing doesn't feel great to me. It doesn't feel documentary enough. It feels like, well, there was a slanted one on that side, so let's tell one that just tells our side of the story on this side. There's not. It's that neither accounts feel balanced. And so the truth, like most things, lays somewhere in the middle. How about that for our civics lesson of the day, folks?
Watchmen. I don't own V for Vendetta. I don't own Marvel Man. I don't own Swamp Thing. I get royalties from it, but that's a pretty recent innovation. Watchmen has made me hundreds of thousands of pounds, but that's not a fraction of what DC made out of it. I'm one of the lucky ones. I'm somebody who became famous and has got enough financial clout to have some say in what they did with their lives. Subsequently, Moore would go on to create and publish his own magazine, Dodgem Logic, with "for adults only" emblazoned on the cover, as the rules that he insists everyone else follow don't apply to him. Moore even returned to working with DC when the independent company he was producing the line of America's Best Comics for 15 years after Watchmen. He was still happily signing work for Harcon.
I think the adults only thing on Dodgem Logic is a little petty because I think that is probably like a requirement in the UK. I might be wrong. I know I got some UK watchers, people out there. Well, you guys know anything about that? If you make an adults only thing, do they have those are they more or less censorious in the UK than the US with labels, explicit labels? I'm against content labels, although I understand them from a parental point of view. I had this argument with the late great Roy Root. He was against content labeling, as well as a lot of creators. He was in line with a lot of creators' visions, like Alan Moore stated he was. And the idea is that your trade dress and your presentation, it should just be clear that this is not a kid's thing. I don't think that's an upholdable standard in law, unfortunately. And I think a lot of publishers are going to be worried about that. So stating some kind of age range or adults only, I think putting adults only is pretty reasonable form of it's not for a certain age. It's for adults.
Contract after contract creating comics and characters his publisher owned, Wildstorm was bought by DC. In 2000, 13 years after he currently claims to have quit DC over Watchmen rights, Moore was still working directly for DC to promote new 15th anniversary editions of the Watchmen collection, ensuring an even greater extended publication life and spin-off merchandise and toys, with his blessing and improved profit participation. In a 2000 interview with Newsarama, he clarified this. "Legally, DC doesn't need my approval to bring out toys or anything like that. They own the book and they have exercised that option in the past 15 years. But shortly before this Watchmen 15th anniversary marketing campaign could happen, DC angered him, and it had nothing to do with contracts or creators' rights or even Watchmen. Shortly before the launch of the Watchmen 15th anniversary campaign, DC decided not to publish, as was their right according to the contracts Moore agreed to, a cobweb story inspired and illustrated by his then girlfriend, now wife, Melinda Gebbie, in Tomorrow's Stories #8, featuring Scientology founder L. Ron Hubbard. It was only after this perceived very personal snub that Moore adopted the deliberately emotive narrative that DC had stolen Watchmen and V for Vendetta from him. Since then, he's used the media publicity around any high-profile DC Warner release of his work, which again he happily signed contracts repeatedly for, to attack, insult, and defame his employers, peers, audience, and even friends, regardless of the financial or reputational consequences for his co-creators, who don't share his very personal grudges or his considerable income. To justify his public flaying of fellow creators, Moore realized that creative rights was a far more noble whip to wield than revenge over the refusal to print his then girlfriend's work, as per the contract that they had both signed.
That feels a little cheap, talking about his then girlfriend's work or whatever. I mean, his story got censored for content reasons and not obscenity reasons. It got censored for daring to criticize the Church of Scientology and L. Ron Hubbard. Now, DC's a big company. Time Warner's a big company. Scientology, the Church of Scientology is extremely litigious and have the deepest of deep pockets. But showed a moral cowardice, I think, in censoring that story. So you could see where that would bother Alan.
The only creator's rights that matter and have ever mattered to Moore are his own. His bibliography illuminates as much. He started his career using characters created by others. Even his Watchmen pitch was intended to feature obscure characters created by others, but DC balked at the tone and insisted on new, original pastiches.
Okay, but like the Watchmen characters were great original characters, sure, based superficially on the Charlton characters, but Jesus Christ, come on. Taking the whole idea to enough, that was a starting point aesthetically. And it, obviously took those characters to whole new places and created new characters and was the better story for not being able to use the original Charlton characters. If you don't believe me, go read the Grant Morrison version where he tried to tell Watchmen with like these characters. It's forgettable is probably the best thing I could say about it.
Watchmen for over 30 years, he almost exclusively signed lucrative work for hire contract after contract, featuring other creators' characters, and even his most recent cell phone work has featured a myriad of historical fictional characters created by other authors, though Moore does not recognize or even acknowledge the original creators. Despite it,
I guess that's a fair point. Like, is there explicit acknowledgement of the creators in those things? Are they public domain? Most of them, many of them, yes. Do the creators still deserve a lot of respect and some kind of credit? Probably legally, no. If it's in the public domain, they don't. And he changed the things that weren't. I'm going to give him a pass on that.
His repeated attack on adaptations of his work. He actually now states adaptations from one medium to the other doesn't work. He has had no problem adapting others' work from one medium into comics without any reference or acknowledgement of the author, or with his own adaptations of the comic strip Mirror of Love, or adapting the Bill Sienkiewicz illustrated plot to light into a spoken word piece, or even big numbers into a proposed television series, not to mention H.G. Wells' War of the Worlds, which Moore adapted from start to finish for the second series of his League of Extraordinary Gentlemen. Again, forgetting and whitewashing Wells' contribution. Of course, Moore also famously sold the rights to two of his creator-owned books, From Hell and League of Extraordinary Gentlemen. The fact is that for all the kudos and credit Moore receives over his very public principled objections to adaptations, they actually only apply where DC Comics will profit from them. Moore
is it fair? Is it a fair point? I mean, he's done other He's adapted other work. He's adapted other work into comics and his own comics work into other media. Although I believe it's a completely different thing when the author of the original work does the adaptation, does the adapting. Look at Mario Puzo's Godfather. Hey, are you watching The Offer on Paramount Plus? I really wanted to watch. I watched the first episode. It was okay. The story of how The Godfather got created is awesome, though.
sold or approved adaptations of almost every comic he co-owns, including League of Extraordinary Gentlemen, From Hell, Brought to Light, Big Numbers, and Mirror of Love, despite his principled objections to adaptations of comics into any other media. Meanwhile, he incandescently rages, demeans, and defames anyone who works on the characters he co-created, sold, and continues to be paid for. He attacks and insults anyone who works on Watchmen spin-offs, as his contract allows. The likes of Joe Kubert, John Higgins, Len Wein, Darwin Cook, Adam Hughes, Amanda Connor, and others were portrayed by him as immoral, talentless scabs, and thrown to the horde of Moore fans and media, and even their more gullible peers who regurgitate his lies like a mantra.
To be fair, all the Moore adaptations, right? They're what we call, they're what we call Watchmen babies. And And there's a lot of them. They are done without, you know, the Watchmen TV series is such a done at a time when after we know the creator's feelings on adaptations of his work and that he feels he was stolen from, whether he was or not. So if he wants to cast aspersions on the people that did the After Watchmen books, I think that's fair ground. That's fair game. I mean, they knew what they were in for when they did it, so they opened themselves up to that. And also, to be fair, those books stink. I didn't read them all, and there's some great artists, but man, I tried reading the comedian JFK assassination connection one. It was horrendous.
Specifically, Morty Moore said before watching creators. What's the word? I don't want to use creators. I feel that the industry employees who are actually working on this book, I'd only heard about 3 of them, but I'm certainly not interested in seeing any of their work. But unlikely to because I don't read comics anymore, and they're never going to do anything outside of comics. I can see why the people concerned are involved, having either never created anything original themselves, or if they did, it certainly wasn't good. If DC want to soil themselves in public and kill the reputations of a number of otherwise possibly halfway decent writers and artists, then I'm certainly not going to stop them. And I shall take my fun and my pleasure, however it comes. Exactly this time in 2012, Moore was working on...
I mean, yeah, Joe Kubert. What's that guy ever done outside of his? He's really well known for his Watchmen adaptations.
A new series of League of Extraordinary Gentlemen, featuring characters who creators he's whitewashed from existence, and he was researching a work-for-hire sequel to a popular series created by Garth Ennis called Crossed. Moore's derogatory comments about creators, essentially doing what he did all his career, were echoed and amplified by his supporters, including many of his peers and comic media outlets, in spite of the blatant hypocrisy, and particularly petty and dismissive language used. In an interview with Rolling Stone, the late Darwin Cook, one of those creators, said, "I've read some pretty nasty things said about myself. For example, I can deal with that. There are times when I wish some of these guys, because I think some of them know better, I wish they would take a moment and stop and think. And instead of referring to a man like Joe Kubert as a scab or a disgrace, you might want to stop for a minute and think with this diverse group of talent involved with the project, maybe there is more to the story than they know. Sadly, the self-perpetuated false victimization of Moore still persists to this day."
I love Darwin Cook, but again, I'll say everybody associated with that knew how Moore would probably feel or should have known. Maybe they didn't. And he's alluding that maybe they were told secretly behind the scenes before they did it, Alan approved or something like that. I love Darwin Cook. He was great. Guy was awesome. He's a pretty outspoken guy too. So I believe that those creators were paid a lot of money and knew they would get a lot of exposure for their Watchmen babies. And I also believe that that's okay. They made their choice to do it. They made their choice to do work for hire stuff, just like Alan did. Even after all that stuff, all that Wildstorm stuff, he did some junk. He did some crappy Wildstorm comics. The best Image book he did was 1963, I think, for sure. Although I loved all the America's Best comic stuff. Ironically, that were coming out from DC for so long. Whereas he's like, no, I'm actually Wildstorm published via DC technicality. It just seems like sometimes he's so moralistic and making such judgments, but for himself, it's very selective. And honestly, that's his right, and that's okay. It's just, I think we build people up and expect more of them, especially when they moralize a lot. But then as you get older, you realize that the more someone outspokenly preaches and moralizes, the more there's something going on behind the scenes. Case in point.
The comic industry he loathed made Moore a millionaire. He was amongst the highest paid writers in the industry. He made a small fortune just from selling his own film options and receives more in royalties in retirement than most of his co-creators put together. Enjoying a modest, frugal lifestyle, Moore, unlike most of his co-creators, never needs to work or worry about money again. And this was before his latest Bloomsbury multi-book deal was announced. He can easily afford to use his own creators' rights to stop reprints and their income to punish co-creators he deems have transgressed against, regardless of who else suffers as a consequence. In Pictopia is considered by some to be Moore's finest work. It was a creator-owned 13-page comic strip produced for a charity fundraiser, written by Moore and illustrated by artist Don Simpson, with assistance from Mike Cazalet, Pete Poplaski, and Eric Vincent. It was a heartfelt, poignant, and terrifying tale of the familiar archetypal denizens of the comic book city. A premise Moore would later revisit, without co-creator Simpson, years later, with his top 10 comic for DC.
Both are great. I love Don Simpson. I love In Pictopia. Top 10 is amazing. it takes the idea of Pictopia, yeah, that concept, and takes it to a really, really cool place with Gene Ha and Xander Cannon. One of my all-time favorite Moore works, especially the later stuff. If you read that Top 10, the 49ers graphic novel, really some poignant stuff. And funny start to finish, great art, etc. I don't know if they're trying to say that Don Simpson is owed a piece of Top 10, but I don't think Don would think that.
Become seriously impacted by the COVID pandemic, Don Simpson was approached in 2020 by publisher Fantagraphics to reprint In Pictopia in its own book. Moore, however, won't allow his In Pictopia co-creator to use his name on the project or to promote or support it, because he didn't like a critique Fantagraphics published in the magazine in the 90s. Simpson says, Allen gave his reasons for not wanting his name on the book as not wanting to be associated with Fantagraphics. This stemmed from something negative written about him in the Comics Journal in the 1990s. How a negative sentence or two could outweigh the overwhelmingly glowing praise for Allen's work in the comics press back in the 20th century boggles my mind, but he still holds that resentment. It's even more boggling as Moore is not shy when it comes to critiquing others, their work, or even his own critics themselves.
So this is what I alluded to, or I talked about actually earlier, as that like he could have not allowed that book to come be printed at all, which would have cost Don Simpson money. All this did was, I believe his attempt was to make Fantagraphics make less money. I'm actually don't remember. And unfortunately, in my interview with Don Simpson, I don't know, for those of you, for you super fans out there, all 0.5 of you, I was interviewing Don Simpson and I lost power. My whole neighborhood lost power and I had to jump, but I jumped into my backyard. A few minutes later, got on my phone and Don was still talking. And so that's a really interesting interview. I promised to have him back sometime. But to be honest, he's kind of sick of always talking about Alan Moore, Alan Moore, that, right? So I want to bring him in and we'll just talk about Bizarre Heroes and Megaton Man and whatever. Even more than we already did.
Seems as with everything else in Moore's anarchic world, based on equality, there is one rule for him and another for everyone else. Don Simpson worked through the pandemic at a local factory night job to make ends meet, while Moore still collects royalties from the top 10 series their work together inspired. The gangster and corrupt corporations that he rails against for stealing, swindling, and driving creators to an early grave demonstrably treat creators far better than Moore does. It was the lawyers representing Marvel Comics' legal department who recognized and addressed all the legal costs around Moore's Miracle Man, remunerated Marvel Man's failed elderly creator Mick Anglo, co-creator Alan Davis, and Gary Leach, and all the other talents who were involved. Watchmen and V for Vendetta owner DC Comics pays the 1963 talent better royalties on their DC work than the work they actually own and co-created with Moore. Both Marvel and DC acknowledge and credit the original creators of their characters, while Moore, who owns and has complete creative control over his most recent works, League of Extraordinary Gentlemen and Lost Girls, doesn't recognize any of the creators of the central characters he uses. In every single instance.
So the fun of Miracle Man, you begin
only to Moore, not the companies that employed him. Co-creator Simpson, years later, with his top 10 tales of his new works being dependent on their creations. He doesn't afford them any recognition in any of his dozens of published editions. They are deliberately forgotten. And any contribution to Moore's own work.
Sorry about that, guys.
Ben Ween, who gave Moore his first US work, and in fact the comic he himself had created, Swamp Thing, was subsequently dismissed by Moore as a plagiarist and described as a regurgitator of what was a lame character after Ween had signed on to work on before Watchmen. Amongst the most, and I believe that it was a relatively rare, same as a plagiarist and described as a regurgitator.
That hurts for Lane Wayne, whatever. That's pretty shitty considering he adapted Swamp Thing.
Of what was a lame character after Ween had signed on to work on before Watchmen. Amongst the most prominent creators who made his career that he's defamed is V for Vendetta artist David Lloyd, who has been described in interviews by Moore as an ungrateful, insulting hypocrite. Moore has several interviews to reveal his financial generosity towards some of his co-creators regarding his film option monies, though the benevolence is undermined by how in the very same interviews he then uses this fact to demean and attack them. In an interview with Time Out magazine's Dominic Wells in 2016, Moore says of the V for Vendetta film adaptation's ubiquitous Guy Fawkes masks, "I don't want anything to do with it. Take my name off and give all the money to the wretched David Lloyd, and that includes all the merchandise as well. David Lloyd gets all the money from those masks." Even though Moore never actually wrote any sequence akin to that famous one featuring the masks in the film adaptation's climax, and the masks are purely the concept and work of V for Vendetta artist David Lloyd, Moore still likes to take credit for bestowing the royalties to his partner. Except David Lloyd recalls none of that principled benevolence regarding the film's mask merchandising being true.
So that was the dumbest part of the movie. They FedExed masks to everyone in the, like, that was like something that they came up in a screenwriter's room where they totally disregarded the end of one of the greatest graphic novels ever, V for Vendetta. If we're going to go top 3 for me, it's going to be probably From Hell, V for Vendetta, Watchmen. And there's a bunch I'm forgetting that definitely make up the top 10, but that's my personal top 3. So they're not really confirming or denying David Lloyd's whether he got the money from this or not. They're heavily implying he did not.
Even his most famous co-creator, Watchmen artist Dave Gibbons, has been painted by Moore as an unscrupulous, disloyal, and greedy. Moore's last public comments on his most prominent co-creator and friend for over 3 decades come from the same interview with Wells. Dave Gibbons: I hope I never see that effort for as long as I live. Moore has been so successful at employing his fictional revamping in real life, he's not even making much of an effort in his extraordinary excuses, and they're still accepted by the media and his supporters. His most recent paranoid conspiracy-level defamation against his friend and Watchmen co-creator Dave Gibbons actually involves flat Earth-level conjecture. The dead friend, the deceased friend's dying relative, supervillainous machinations by DC, and pantomime dialogue that any other writer would be embarrassed to use. Gibbons has denied Moore's account of their breakup ever happened. Regardless of all the available evidence that contradicts Moore's varying versions of events, the actual facts that make alive his accounts, the stance of his equal co-creators, and the openness with which Moore indulges in the actual practices he falsely condemns others for, his supporters.
He glossed over a lot there with that explanation. I mean, the last time I heard it was that Gibbons didn't say thank you for getting the Watchmen money. And it probably, maybe, possibly has something to do with Dave getting really into bed with DC and doing a lot of stuff with them and for them, where Moore didn't feel comfortable with that. And so he didn't like him anymore. I mean, the fact that they are both rights holders, you know, equal stakeholders in the Watchmen, that, and the Watchmen is what it is, one of the most influential graphic novels of all time. You know, more money, more problems.
Still believe him and propagate his attacks on his innocent peers for the pettiest of personal vendettas, whether imagined or illogical or manufactured, and given all the respectability of fake news by the individuals and organs that regurgitate them. While the more objective observers might imagine Moore's supporters aren't influenced by his more extreme fatwas, a series of tweets by professional comics letterer Jim Campbell exemplifies the mindset of many of Moore's supporters. In September 2020, Forbidden Planet UK released a variant cover for Rorschach issue 1 by comics legend and Moore co-creator Brian Boland. Campbell took the opportunity to follow Moore's lead and defame not just Boland, but everyone who had ever worked on or produced a variant cover on a Watchmen spin-off. F anyone who participates in this blatant IP theft by DC. If your paycheck is so important that you'll sanction this absolute robbery, F you, he continued. But if other creators didn't line up to help massive corporations F over other creators, well, that would be nice, wouldn't it? Campbell.
That's a false equivalency there. I'm with Alan on this. I'm sorry, dude. Anybody in the industry, any of these professionals who didn't know, you would be offending Alan Moore by doing fucking Watchmen sequels and prequels. You're an idiot. Full stop.
Whether willfully or blissfully ignorant of the fact that Moore didn't need the help of massive corporations to F over other creators throughout his career, later deleted those tweets, and then subsequently reiterated that he stood by everything he said. Amongst those, Campbell and presumably Moore, accused of theft, are Moore's co-creators Brian Boland, Bill Sienkiewicz, John Higgins, T. Craig Russell, Kevin Nolan, and Bruce Timm. Moore, who in fairness...
By the way, a murderer's row of the greatest cartoonists some of the greatest cartoonists in the industry. These are not second or third tier hacks. They did get some of the very best. Yeah, Peerless. How could they not? How could they not know? So they made a pretty conscious choice. But then again, maybe they felt slighted by Alan. Maybe they felt jealous of Alan. Maybe it was a combination. Maybe they had met at a convention many years ago or at some other time, or they reached out and got rebuffed or got called a hack or a thief or whatever. And they're like, all right, if I'm a hack and I'm a thief, let me hack and thieve.
This also describes pretty much everyone who worked on Watchmen except for himself as thieves. Also suggested his co-creators, along with the likes of Len Wein, Neil Adams, Jim Steranko, Joe Kubert, Jose Garcia Lopez, and Darwin Cook, as having
those losers
anything original themselves, or if they did, but it wasn't good. These creators' crime was to work on characters co-created by Moore. Characters who would have been Charlton or Archie characters, some of whom Moore proposed killing and raping without regard to their original creators' wishes, until a DC editor suggested he use archetypes, so as not to destroy the brands and get himself a better deal in rights and royalties. Although his supporters like Jim Campbell all point to Moore's cherishing of creators' rights, in spite of his repeated victimization, as the reason for his constant attacks on the medium industry, friends and fans that made him, the only thing that he has actually held very dearly throughout his career is petty personal grudges. For all his claims of being the victim of liars, bullies, thieves, and swindlers, the only actual examples that the facts support are where he's the pathological liar, the defamatory bully, or the perpetrator of fraud and theft. Later this year, thanks to Moore signing a deal with J.K. Rowling's publisher Bloomsbury, a collection of his prose work, Illuminations, will be published and will be treated to another slew of poor Alan Moore articles and interviews. In spite of Bloomsbury's considerable investment in Moore's solo ventures into a new medium, his most acclaimed and ubiquitous work remains those in collaboration with equally talented co-creators. As a writer, Moore is a genius, but as a person, he's a narcissistic, paranoid, vindictive individual. More hurtfully, as an advocate or figurehead for principled, ethical, and moral creators' rights, he's the epitome of hypocrisy, who has attacked and defamed his co-creators, their work, and industry over the most banal of slights or consequences of his own actions. So the next time you read any Illuminations-inspired article or interview with Moore involving lying, swindling, gangster ethics, cheated creators, bullying, and stealing, spare a thought for Alan Davis or the 1963 co-creators, or all the artists he attacked and defamed, from Gibbons and Lloyd to the Before Watchmen teams, or even the creators of the League of Extraordinary Gentlemen characters, all left in the dark, while Moore shines the spotlight on himself. If you've enjoyed or appreciated this investigation, please click one of those button things like subscribe or like or the bell or something like that, just so you'll be informed when the next article goes up. I have about 2, maybe 3 more.
I clicked it. I clicked like, and I subscribed to this guy. He's gotten, it says 2,700 views on this so far, and it dropped yesterday. That's good. That's, I mean, for a guy who has no other videos and has hardly any subscribers, 71 subscribers, I suggest going on and subscribing to the guy. Like, look, agree or disagree. And I'm gonna say this is a bit of a hatchet job, but with some reason. Now here's the thing. Here's the thing that's really difficult to overstate, is that, like, Alan Moore is a writer and a phenomenon and a celebrity unlike any other in the comics industry or many in the literary world as well. I mean, he's got literary credentials, and it's produced books that are not comics that some people really liked. Never had a really big hit yet. I'm looking forward. I like his novels, but I love his comics. I think his best work is with collaborators, but I also think that his very best work is maybe yet to come. He says it won't be in comics, but I have a feeling he could make more comics again. But here's the thing, okay? There are not many people in the artistic world at all that are at the level Alan Moore is at. And the topics that he talked about and the things that he did, redefining a medium, taking comics to a next level thematically and structurally, like structurally innovating in how you write panel transitions and stuff like that. I mean, and thoughtfulness in subject matter, a breadth of subject matter, and a depth, and a treating your audience with absolute respect and as adults, no matter what kind of story you're writing. I mean, even his Superman and Batman stuff really, like, is at a next level compared to most. But his persona has transcended so much that, dude, everybody has to be trying to get at Alan. Right? Everybody, including me. Like, I couldn't talk to him, and now here I am making shitty, angry revenge videos about the guy. Except I'm not. This is not a revenge video at all. But I talked to enough of these creators to know that they are materially suffering from the action, or rather inaction, of Alan Moore on allowing some works to be reprinted. That feels vindictive, although Alan is within his rights legally, or he would have been sued, no doubt about it. When you're that successful, you're a target for lawsuits, as well as haters and angry people with vendettas and he said, she said stories. You're going to be a magnet for that. So, man, I can't blame him wanting to wash his hands of the whole thing. And also, just in my bit of delving into the comics industry and the few people I've talked to, it's an industry that, like any other industry, that's what I'll say. It's not unique in this way, but it's small, it's insular, and there's a lot of glad handing and a lot of talking behind people's back. That's just life, right? And that's got to suck. And when you're at the top of that totem pole, like Moore has become, you become a target for ass kissers and adulation and sycophants And then also for people who just want to tear you down to bring themselves up. That's what people will accuse me of doing, and certainly are accusing Mike Crotty of doing in this video. Don Simpson thought that I should reach out to Mike. This is funny. I was kind of wondering if he didn't modulate his voice, which made me wonder if it was an industry pro under an assumed identity. That's funny. I don't think so. I think he's just British. But yeah, you know what I mean? Like, the guy is getting hit from every angle. When you hit that level of celebrity, you can't even imagine what it's like. You can't know what people's intentions are when they're trying to get to know you, and you get burned enough that you start to assume the worst. And honestly, these guys probably do chitter chatter about, oh, Alan, he's a magician, and hail Glycon, and like, there's a certain amount of jealousy that he was getting so much attention as this super genius, when, especially for a work like Watchmen, for any of his works, any of his comics works, he chose some of the best co-creators ever. And the quality that those people brought to the table elevated it. Like, in another artist's hands, Watchmen would not be Watchmen. It couldn't be. It couldn't be. From Hell couldn't be From Hell without Eddie Campbell. And In Pictopia couldn't have been In Pictopia without Don Simpson either. So this is tough. This is a way where, a place where I can love the guy and respect the guy, and all I can do is say, not that this means anything, I think of fans and people who really respect him, especially from his moral standpoint, feel disappointed that he would treat co-creators this way. I think that's fair. I don't know. It makes me sad, but what are you going to do? Guys, now Alan Moore's just a person like anybody else. He's got feelings just like anybody else. You may think of him as this literary god, but he's just a man, and a lonely man at that. Just like me. Hey, if you liked watching this today, I'm going to wrap this thing up now. If you liked watching this, please consider hitting like, hitting subscribe on this video. Come back and see me tomorrow. I'm going to do it again and talk about something completely different. Hopefully a little bit more fun too. And then on Thursday, I'll be in here with Larry Young. We'll be looking at the $1 Million Mail Box, talking about some of the comics that have been sent in to me. And if you want to see your comics on the screen, you got to send them here to the $1 Million Mailbox, P.O. Box 1163, Arcata, California, 95518. Send them in. We'll show them on the screen. But tune in tomorrow, Wednesday, Danger Room, where we're going to talk about what? I don't even know. Hey, Peerless Loser. Fun show, Dan. Thanks. I started following you. Thanks for being so interactive. Hey, you're welcome. Thank you for participating in the conversation. That's what Danger Room is all about. So come on in. Check me out tomorrow. I'm going to play my credits here and get out of here. Thanks, guys, for checking this out. We'll see you tomorrow.